I hear over and over again from companies, oh, it's going to cost too much for me to convert to this process to be decarbonized, to produce a sustainable product, blah, blah. What is the cost of inaction? And we don't see companies looking and valuing what the cost of inaction is, right? So for me, as I look forward the next 5-10 years, it's innovation and growth, it's consumer and customer opportunity, it's reduction of risk, it's operational efficiencies, it's engagement with your employees. It's a whole series of benefits that just come along with good management and good innovation. And that's how we should be thinking about sustainability.
Welcome to the Future in Sound podcast. I'm your host, Jenn Wilson. This is a podcast where we discuss people, planet, and profit. In each episode, we'll learn from world-leading experts who can help us see the future we want and our role in it. This is episode 43, Innovation. Tensie Whelan is Distinguished Professor of Practice for Business and Society and the founding director of the NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business, where she's bringing her 25 years of experience working on local, national, and international environmental and sustainable issues to engage businesses in proactive and innovative mainstreaming of sustainability. As president of the Rainforest Alliance, she built the organization from a $4.5 million to a $50 million budget, transforming the engagement of business with sustainability. Her previous work included serving as executive director of the New York League of Conservation Voters, vice president of the National Audubon Society, managing editor of Ambio, a journal of the Swedish Academy of Sciences, and a journalist in Latin America. Tensie has been recognized by Ethisphere as one of the 100 most influential people in business ethics and was a City Fellow in Leadership and Ethics at NYU Stern. She's served on numerous nonprofit boards and currently serves on the advisory boards of ALO Advisors, Edelman, Giant Ventures, Nespresso, and Workiva, and is an advisor to the Future Economy Project for the Harvard Business Review. Tensie, it is such a pleasure to have you here on the Future in Sound podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
Now, Tensie, I am so curious to hear. So often we have conversations on this podcast where we're talking to folks who've just been in academia or they've just been authors, and I'm saying just as though it's more than enough, but just staying in one lane and they stay in that lane. But it's actually very rare to see someone come from the nonprofit sector and then come into, creating a Center for Sustainable Business at a university, but then also working with private sector. I'd just love to hear, how have you managed that?
It's actually been wonderful. I've really feel lucky in my career. I've had the opportunity to live and work in other countries and learn about other cultures and learn about sustainable development up front and personal in places like Latin America. And I think my path has always been, how do we move forward? How do we find action? How do we change things? And from my perspective, one of the ways that you change things, and really one of the most effective ways, if you get it right, is to work with business, to partner with business, to change how they do business. Government obviously is very important in terms of the policies and that they promulgate, but they move at a slow pace. As we've seen recently, there's ups and downs in what they focus on. Whereas if you can get corporates to understand the benefit of doing things in a positive way for themselves and for society, they can move forward and take things to scale. And so my work at Rainforest Alliance, for example, was using markets to drive sustainability uptake amongst everybody in the value chain, from farmers and foresters to retailers, and we were able to get to scale because we use market-based mechanisms versus most NGOs. When they do that, they have to get money to fund a project. And if that project goes well, they get money to fund another project. And by that time, the founder's tired of these projects and they can't grow them, right? So that's always been my interest, is sort of where's the power dynamic? How do we actually change things? And I find that business is a good way to do so.
I'm really interested. You make this transition into NYU Stern from the Rainforest Alliance. And what was it, the Center for Sustainable Business, we're going to get into, value and sustainability here in a moment. But what was it when the center was founded? What was the purpose? And how does this connect to this idea that, okay, in order to have transformative impact, we need to involve business?
Well, so after 15 years of running Rainforest Alliance, I was looking around for what I wanted to do next. And I had guest lectured at Stern. And the head of the department at the time asked me if I'd like to come teach. And I thought about it because in a way, when you run an NGO, in fact, you're teaching. And I came back to him and said, actually, that would be really intriguing, but I'm also an entrepreneur and I don't think I can only teach. And so I looked at Stern, and at that time, they had nothing to do with sustainability, no sustainability offerings for students, no sustainability research. So I came back to the chair and to the dean, and I said, look, I'd like to set up a Center for Sustainable Business for you. I'll raise the funds for it. And I got an initial grant for $1 million from the City Foundation. And they said, okay. So where what was intriguing to me about coming to a business school and what I wanted to do was, in fact, to start to articulate and define the value associated with investing in sustainability. Because when I was running Rainforest Alliance, I saw significant financial benefit for everybody in the supply chain, but nobody recognizing it or tracking it. In fact, I did a little work with the UN Global Compact when Georg Kell was there to explore that when I was running Rainforest Alliance. I just got very intrigued. And so coming to Stern, we set up the center. I set up the center to really focus on helping current and future business leaders embed sustainability core to business strategy to drive better financial performance as well as better societal performance. Because in my view, you don't get the speed and scale you need until business understands that it drives financial opportunity as well as societal opportunity, unfortunately, but that's just the way it is, right? But in fact, it does. And so that is sort of the unlock that I saw in my own work in the field at Rainforest Alliance and wanted to bring to one of the premier business schools in the country.
So you go to Stern, you're an entrepreneur as well as a professor, and I'm really interested in the story of Rosie. And this is something that has really come to the fore in some conversations in private markets. We have now industry associations like the ESG Data Convergence Initiative that are inspired by the work that you've done, Tensie, yourself and your team. And I'm really interested, what's the story of Rosie? How did it come about? Where are we coming from? And where are we now?
Yeah, so Rosie stands for Return on Sustainability Investment, though we like to think of it as Rosie the Riveter, could get anything done, right? So as I said, as I was working, I worked with hundreds of companies all throughout the supply chain. I worked with producers. I worked in, I personally didn't work in 60 countries, but my organization did. And so I started to see pretty consistently similar types of financial benefits, tangible and intangible, that were coming about as a result of sustainability investments. So, for example, looking at small cocoa farmers and seeing that when you put sustainability practices in place, their productivity increases, their net costs decrease, their access to market increases, and a number of environmental and social impacts occur. And then I was sitting next to an insurance broker at a dinner, and he started telling me about how, because the cocoa and coffee were certified by Rainforest Alliance, this coffee and cocoa was no longer, quote unquote, falling off the back of the trucks as it's transported, in other words, being stolen, because there was traceability required. And because of that, he was giving lower premiums to the trader who was purchasing the insurance. And that trader was now giving those premiums or the difference back to the farmers since they were ones making the investments in sustainability. And then further up the chain, I started to see, for example, as we started to work with Lipton and PG Tips in sustainable tea in UK, how they started to take market share away from other companies. And in fact, then those other companies then got on the bandwagon, right, to become certified and sustainable. So, throughout the chain, I just saw all these operational efficiencies, innovation and growth opportunities, sales and marketing benefits, employee retention and productivity benefits, risk mitigation benefits. If you understand and track the sort of sustainability in your supply chain, economic and social, when you have, and environmental, you have more stable suppliers, but you also have less of a potential reputational or market risk, right? So a whole series of benefits that, again, no one was tracking. And so that insight led me to begin to sort of figure out a framework when I got to Stern for how we actually track that. Published an article in Harvard Business Review called The Comprehensive Business Case for Sustainability. It was sort of the first out there on this topic. And, since then I've published a lot of different aspects of this in HBR, MNT Sloan, and others, but found that we could identify 9 drivers of better financial performance that would drive a variety of different types of financial benefits that, in fact, any kind of good management can drive. Like any kind of good management can drive innovation or operational efficiency or sales and marketing benefits or employee retention. But the fact of the matter is, and this is what we started to map, for every industry, sustainability strategies that are tied to the material, environmental, and social issues for that industry can drive 3 or 4 of these different rosy benefits at any point in time. So just to give you one example, circularity, right? Circularity can drive operational efficiencies in that you're buying less virgin input because you're reusing product and you're paying less for your waste disposal costs. It can also drive supply chain resiliency. When I was on the board of Aston Martin, if we didn't get one car component, we couldn't build the car. So if you're putting some used car components back into your car, you're less dependent on sort of challenging geopolitical risk into your supply chain. Right now in the United States, circularity is driving less exposure to tariffs. Okay. If you're putting used component back into your product, like we did a study with a medical device company, a lot of medical device components come from outside the US where there's 10% plus tariffs, right? You will reduce your costs significantly. We also see from circularity, if you look at the pre-loved apparel space, the brands are now able to get a second bite at the apple. They can resell a product and get money out from it twice. So there's a series of financial benefits, and those are just a few of that one sustainability strategy that nobody tracks currently, right? And I can go on, but that's sort of the unlock. That's how Rosie works. One other point I would make about Rosie is that it's not at the strategy level that you monetize. So in other words, I have a strategy as to improve waste management. It's the practices that I'm putting in place to execute on my waste management strategy that I can monetize, right? Because those practices may be effective or ineffective. I mean, this is another thing, you get a lot of noise because people say, oh, well, I have a policy on waste management. Okay, well, so what? What does that actually result in, So understanding what specifically you're doing to reduce waste to landfill, right? Then helps you understand how you're driving financial value from it.
So I guess just because you have a dashboard does not necessarily mean that we are getting into the activities or creating leads, helping those leads turn into qualified leads, into ultimately sales. And so I guess what you're saying is that we need to look one level below at the actual activities to determine, for example, the value of improved waste management. Is that right?
Exactly. I mean, another example is you put LED lighting in your factories. All right. So in theory, and actually some companies don't do this, but in theory, you're at least tracking your energy cost savings. But you also have significant maintenance savings. We find 50% at least because, you don't have to change the bulbs on those high ceilings as often, right? We also see significant productivity increases because the lighting's better and sometimes less accidents, right? So you could start to look into some of those intangibles and understand the full benefit of that investment in ways that you don't currently.
That's really clear. And it's interesting, the past 10 years have been fascinating from a sustainability and business standpoint. So when you started NYU Stern and, Rosie it was sort of born, we definitely saw a lot of changes. So 2019, 2020, there was sort of this momentum around sustainability and investment. We've recently had some headwinds when it comes to sustainability. I'm just interested, as Rosie has been developing, how has the backdrop shaped or not shaped Rosie?
Well, first of all, what's interesting to me is that Rosie is becoming even more in demand now because in order to fight back against criticisms, whether it's a company or an investor, they need to demonstrate the financial returns. And what has been, as I alluded to when I first started on this journey, but had continued even during, come back to this for a minute, the sort of whole focus on ESG investing in 2020, 21, what has continued has been a lack of tracking of financial returns. And there's a number of challenges that I think we have the broader political environment, which is very certain, absolutely bears a lot of responsibility for this. But there is some responsibility in the fact that ESG reporting standards are process and output based. They're not performance and outcome based. In other words, they track things like whether you have a policy, whether you've trained X number of people, whether you've looked at your chemicals, whether you've, activities and outputs. So if you try to manage ESG reporting metrics, which honestly a number of private equity firms have done, you're not going to drive either societal impact or financial value because they don't. It's just like it would be just like you would to drive your strategy to some financial metrics as opposed to the things that will lead you to those financial metrics, right? And so you need key performance indicators around sustainability that then you can map to ESG reporting metrics. The other thing that I want to point out around ESG and how people focused on ESG strategy and investing is unlike sustainability, profitability is not included in there, right? So ESG was always meant to be, when the UN first came up with that term, a system of measurement. Okay, you have sustainability commitments. How are you delivering against your environmental, social, and governance commitments? It was never meant to be a standalone strategy because it isn't the same thing as sustainability, which incorporates profitability and sort of harmonization of these topics. So I think there's a variety of legitimate reasons why there's some backlash, as well as some very illegitimate ones. And so from my perspective, the return on sustainability investment work actually gets to the heart of that problem and helps leadership, investors, sustainability leads, finance folks really understand those connections between sustainability and better financial performance.
Hey, it's Jenn. I just wanted to take a quick moment to let you know a bit about Rico and what we do. We're a tech-enabled advisory firm that helps private market investors and companies measure sustainability metrics using our software platform. We also help you to set targets and focus your efforts on sustainability areas that really matter for your business. And finally, we help clients to translate all of this work into your core value creation strategy or your business model. Check us out at re.co.com to get in touch. All right, now back to our conversation. If I'm a private market investor listening to this and thinking, okay, I'm in the operations team or in the value creation team, at a very high level, very simple level, how does this Rosie thing work? Like, what do I need to incorporate into how I manage portfolio companies going forward to think through the return on sustainability investment?
Well, so first of all, we've developed a GP sustainability value driver tool that has 2 stages to it that will help you get to the first sort of strategic prioritization you need. And then we have the Rosie tools that help you get to the quantification. And all this is open source on our website with cases with different companies, PE firms, as well as corporates. So at the due diligence phase, this value driver tool has you enter in your particular target company industry and auto-populates with the SASB plus a few industry-specific material topics. But we do not use their metrics because, again, they're 90% sort of output and activity-oriented. So it auto-populates with the material issues, but then with the most common sustainability strategies, practices, and then value drivers. Then you enter in a bit of information about how the target company is currently performing. We give you some guidance on how to do that. Then it generates a heat map, but again, not based on ESG reporting metrics, but based on value drivers. So if you can see the associated with the material issues. So you might see, for example, that this company has a lot of red around chemical management. But you can also see on the value driver side that there might be actually some significant benefit if you invest in that company to actually shift that. Or you might see on the green side that it's got, really high scores in sustainable packaging. It's been an innovative there. It's sort of undervalued for that. So that's a place where you could buy them and really invest. Okay, so that's at the due diligence stage. Then when you get into your 100-day holding period, this looks more future forward. So it gives you an ability to analyze against the material topics, and you can narrow them down, right? Future-facing risk and future-facing upside. Because again, another big problem is a lot of this stuff is just risk-oriented. And a lot of people don't, PE doesn't really, they invest a little bit against risk, but not much. And it's much more on upside. So there it identifies that. And then again, it'll give you, you'll enter in a few things, but then it'll give you a scatter plot where you can find kind of what's the highest risks, downside and upside to manage, as well as level of effort. Then it leads you pick a few, it leads you to some sustainability KPIs and some rosy KPIs that you can use with your portfolio company to manage how they perform, so that both during the life of the holding and at exit, you have the narrative to explain the financial returns. The rosy work will go into more detail around what are those specific monetization methods you can use, what are the specific drivers of better financial performance by industry. So we've done automotive, agriculture, real estate, healthcare, energy, et cetera, right? There's a number of things that work across all sectors, but there's also quite a lot of differences. I mean, what drives value in an IT firm is going to be different than a heavy manufacturing company, right? So you need to understand those, or an ag firm, right? So you need to sort of get a little bit deeper, as you would in that initial process, to understand what's material, and then go in and sort of make sure you put in place a way for your portfolio companies to track these financial returns. And I'm happy to go into some examples, but that's the kind of overview.
I would love to get some examples. So what I'm hearing is that this is not unlike if a deal team is looking at a new opportunity. They're thinking about what's material to that company. They're thinking about how can they transform this company to grow it. And so it's clear that this is in line with that, thinking about what's going to not just create risk, but also opportunity, and then managing around that. How do we measure that? How do we make sure that we're on track, or flag if we're not on track? So that's really clear in theory, and would love to hear some examples, Tensie.
Absolutely. So I'll give you some corporate examples. So we looked at one automotive company who had significant waste management strategies, a strategy and a number of practices, including things like recycling paint and solvent. When you recycle paint and solvent, you no longer buy the virgin product, you no longer pay for waste disposal costs, and actually they had some left over that they're selling, right? That's just one of the practices they put in place. They were netting from their waste management strategies $235 million annually, which they did not know because they were not tracking it. They were looking at it as a cost of compliance, which is a problem we see with companies all the time. And this is also a big issue that corporates and GPs need to look at. Corporate finance does not track avoided cost. Avoided cost, and that's nothing to do with sustainability, it's just generally, right? Avoided cost is a huge element of benefits associated with sustainability. Avoided energy costs, avoided water costs, avoided fees, regulatory fees, avoided loss of employees in terms of turnover, right? All of those costs are really, really significant in today's world, and yet are not really brought into the equation. So that's one learning from looking at that type of process. I mentioned medical devices before and circularity. So to give you sort of the financials on that, it's fascinating. For this medical device company, we looked at if they refurbish the medical devices as well, instead of throwing them away and buying new ones, for the cost of about $500,000, one-time cost, they would be netting $3.5 million annually in both reduced cost and upside. Again, if they hadn't been tracking the reduced costs, they would never have gotten at that number. if we look at more of an intangible, sort of on the social side, we worked with REI, purpose-driven, sustainability-oriented activewear company, to look at how much did that focus on mission and purpose drive better retention and productivity, and what did that mean for the bottom line? And so they had very robust annual survey instruments, exit interviews, et cetera. So we were able to make a very strong correlation. And then we looked at what their cost of turnover was, what high productivity individuals generated, and were able to, with their CFO's office, define about $34 million annually in net benefit of their purpose and sustainability program, which was about 5% of payroll. Again, which nobody really tracks, right? We're in the process of working on a health and safety example, which we'll be unveiling at our annual private equity practicum in December. So I'm excited about that because I'm finding there's a lot of value in health and safety that companies are currently not recognizing. They're doing the minimum required from a compliance perspective, of course, but they're not seeing that if they make some investments, the impact on retention, insurance costs, productivity is really significant. So those are a few examples.
And as we look to the future, so these are obviously, you're getting great traction, you're adding topics, you're going deeper into topics on a regular basis. And I'm interested, as we look to the future, the next 5 years, how do you think that value and sustainability is going to evolve as a topic area when it comes to private markets?
Well, one thing I didn't mention in those examples is where the market demand is, right? So I think two things are going to happen. One is that we are increasingly experiencing a high-risk, volatile world in terms of many things. But one thing is sourcing our commodities that we need, and whether that's energy or food or metal, right? It's becoming extremely volatile and more challenging. The impacts of climate change, water scarcity, energy use, et cetera, also increased cost for businesses. So those things are all reality. They're going to continue to grow. So those internal operational changes to be more resilient, to drive efficiency, to reduce dependency on natural commodities as well as on globalized supply chains, all really critical. On the upside, on the market side, the innovation side. So one of the things that I say to folks is don't talk about decarbonization as greenhouse gas emissions. Talk about it as innovation. You're innovating new processes, new products, new services, right? Circularity is the same thing. There is huge innovation opportunity in everything. When a world is in transformation, it means the business has an opportunity to come in there and come up with the new solutions for it. So you have solutions both on the B2B side and on the B2C side that's needed. Let's look at, on the B2C side, laundry detergent. So if you understand the material issues for laundry detergent from an environmental, social, and consumer perspective, you've got these big bottles that are very heavy and cumbersome and expensive for the consumer. They're also heavy, cumbersome, and expensive for the producer, who has a lot of water and cost embedded in producing them and in transporting them, right? And then the consumer has the transport costs as well. You also have the fact that a lot of them require warm or hot water, which is energy footprint, but is also cost for the consumer. So what are we seeing? We're seeing innovations like cold water detergent, which is better for the environment and better for the consumer's budget. But then we're also seeing things like soap leaflets, right? So you just basically have a leaf of soap. It's just a piece of soap. You can get 365 of them in a small cardboard box. That's all you need to buy for the year. There's no embedded plastic, carbon, water, right? The transport's cheap. For me as a consumer, it costs maybe 30% less. I don't have to deal with lugging dozens of, plastic bottles home. So just as an example of the kind of innovation that can be brought to the consumer. On the B2B side, BASF is innovating around manufacturing clients to help them as they do their wastewater management with using less water, extracting a lighter solid. That lighter solid is cheaper to transport, is easier to convert into fertilizer or energy. And the whole process saves money for the client, both in terms of reduced water use and in terms of transport of the output, right? So, we just like, there's just so many things. Domtar Pulp and Paper Company is innovating on like a bag that will have the same qualities as a plastic bag, but paper. In other words, be stretchy and will be strong. Right. So like to me, it's just a fascinating opportunity. And the final thing I'll say on sort of looking forward 5 years is so in addition to innovation is the consumer demand is there. We keep hearing, oh, well, red state, blue state. I'm just talking about the US right now. Red state, blue state, red state don't care, even the blue state, they're not willing to pay more, blah, blah, blah. In fact, we've been tracking with Circana consumer purchasing data, not survey data, purchasing data for the last 12 years. Sustainably marketed products have grown from 13% of the total pie to 24% of the total pie. They're growing 2.3 times faster than conventional at a 27% premium on average, okay? During the last couple of years, during this inflationary period, private label products have grown share, as you might expect, because they're cheaper. Sustainably marketed products have grown share even faster at a 27% premium. Who's lost market share? Conventional brands. And that's another thing I want to say about Rosie, is that I hear over and over again from companies, oh, it's going to cost too much for me to convert to this process to be decarbonized, to produce a sustainable product, blah, blah. What is the cost of inaction? And we don't see companies looking and valuing what the cost of inaction is, right? So for me, as I look forward the next 5-10 years, it's innovation and growth, it's consumer and customer opportunity, it's reduction of risk, it's operational efficiencies, it's engagement with your employees. It's a whole series of benefits that just come along with good management and good innovation. And that's how we should be thinking about sustainability.
It sounds like there's quite a thread around innovation, making better products, services, et cetera. Tensie, I'm really interested, how do you keep up to speed? Obviously, there's the research that you do and you're working with companies particularly, but what do you read? What do you listen to? What inspires you as you think about innovation and its connection to sustainability?
First of all, it's very hard to keep up. So I can't, there's people ask me, well, what's the latest in sort of renewable energy technology? I'm like, I do not know. I can't, there's so much to keep up with. So the way in which I do it is sort of occasionally, I would say every couple of months, I pick a particular vertical to go look into and just to find out what are the super interesting things happening. Like, for example, in apparel, we've got this fast fashion disaster, right? And I love fashion as much as the next person. So, I understand the attraction. So how do we tackle that? Well, people are doing some stuff like, okay, let's make the materials better. Let's figure out how to reuse them, so on. But there's innovation around 3D printing using bio-based material where you can print your dress for the day. And then you take the stuff that's left over, you can put it back in and create another dress. There's another innovation where you can spray for a guy on a t-shirt, spray the t-shirt on for the day. Again, bio-based material. You can choose whatever color you feel like. And then you're done and you toss it into the, recycling thing. I mean, how feasible those two technologies are going to be. The dress takes 36 hours to print, but over time, those things will shift. So just keeping an eye on where are those interesting innovations in your industry? I mean, I think that's the thing. For PE firms, they have generally, 3 to 5, maybe more, but 3 to 5 different industries. And they're keeping an eye on innovation around AI. They're keeping an eye on innovation around, I don't know, whatever non-sustainability topics are relevant for that industry. They should be thinking about that and tracking that for their sustainability innovations for their industry as well, B2B as well as B2C.
I'm relieved to know that I'm not the only one in this space that can't keep my finger on the pulse of every single trend. I have this to read list that I don't know about you, but it's, much longer than I'll ever be able to get through. But I really like that approach of thinking about innovation for particular industries and getting deep. Mm-hmm. Now, my final question for you, and it's one that I really love to ask, actually, it can be a tough question. If there was one book that has most shaped the way you think, what book would that be and why?
Gosh, I would say back in the day, there was Paul Hawkins' book. He was sort of the first on sustainability in business. I'm blanking on the name of the book right now, but it was probably in the 90s that he wrote, and he was sort of the first businessman to come out and say, okay, here's how I've been doing business in a way that's sustainable and why it's driven better, good financial performance for me. And so that was, intriguing and interesting to me. I think books that sort of take a look at conventional economics. I mean, I think Kate Rakin, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce her last name, Donut Economics is interesting. I like to better understand like the fallacies of the economic system that we're also dependent upon. And that's, one useful way to look at it. And another book that I read, I think it's at least 10 or 12 years old at this point, but was called Embedded Sustainability by Chris Laszlo. It got me, really thinking about how do you embed sustainability rather than treating it as this bolt-on exercise. And I still use that concept that he came up with, which is embedded in bolt-on and then CSR, sort of to help students and frankly, business people delineate between those. And it isn't that bolt-on is bad. It's just that should be a place to start, not a place where you end, right? Because you don't drive the impact or value from that. Anyway, so I think, and he has a whole kind of innovation chapter, like how you think about innovation from an environmental social perspective as incremental and transformational. That's sort of helpful from an innovation perspective. So I'm sorry, not just one.
You know what? I love that answer. And so I'll give it to you. You're allowed to have more than one. Tensie, thank you so much for joining us on the Future in Sound podcast.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Jennifer.
The Future in Sound podcast is written and hosted by Jenn Wilson and produced by Chris Attaway. This podcast is brought to you by Rico, a tech-powered advisory company helping private market investors pursue sustainability objectives and value creation in tandem. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to tell a friend about it. And if you have a moment to rate us in your podcast app, we'd really appreciate it. Until next time, thanks for listening.